I think there's no doubt that the expedited nature of the border closure this time around is at least in part informed by criticisms that the government was slower to close the border in the immediacy of the pandemic back in Q1 2020. I would say you outlined two different types of border measures that the government has announced. One is the outright restriction on travel from some number of African countries, and the second is the expectation that those traveling to Canada more generally are subject to COVID tests. I think the latter response is sensible. I don't see how one could criticize it. I must say, Alicia, I'm not as sure about the first set of policy actions. By all accounts, South Africa and some of the other countries that have been covered by this blanket travel ban were cooperating with the international community through the World Health Organization. We know about this strain precisely because these national governments were collaborating. And so it seems to me it risks sending a somewhat kind of perverse message that countries that are going to collaborate and help the globe identify the rise of these new variants may be subject to travel bans and other sanctions that could have significant economic effects. So I'm not as convinced on the outright travel bans. I think in a lot of ways the requirement of testing would solve the fundamental problem we're trying to solve, which is how do we ensure that people who are infected with the virus aren't entering our borders and subjecting the Canadian population to the pandemic. And I don't know precisely why an outright ban it needs to be part of that response.
We saw similar measures put in place with the Delta variant. Flights were banned, or foreign nationals were banned from entry into Canada from India, which is where the Delta variant had first really picked up steam. And we obviously, that didn't help prevent Delta from making its way into Canada and spreading. That is currently the variant of concern that we see the most here in this country. And as you mentioned, the Omicron variant is not just in these Southern African nations. It's around the world now. The US is reporting cases. It's already in Canada. So do you see that travel ban as more kind of pandemic theater, or just a way to show publicly that the government is doing something about it? What do you make of it?
I think there's something to that the public expectation is that the government acts decisively and kind of comprehensively, and a travel ban is a kind of blunt instrument, but it's one that's easily communicated and one that the Canadian public will easily understand. So, there's probably something to that. The fact that other peer jurisdictions have enacted similar bans probably also put some pressure on the Canadian government. If the Canadian government wasn't going to kind of match, for instance, what the Americans were doing vis-a-vis these countries, there's no doubt that would have been the subject of political criticism. So it's not to say that the government isn't in a difficult spot. It just seems to me we're not really interested in banning people generally from entering the country. We're interested in banning people with the virus from entering the country. And so I'm not sure why testing isn't a sufficient protection from ensuring that we minimize, because as you say, we can't eliminate, but we can minimize the extent to which this new strain is entering our borders.